Forget for a moment the romanticized images that dance through popular culture. Forget the swashbuckling heroes and the glittering treasures. Tonight, we delve beneath the surface, exploring a world far more complex, more mundane, and at times, far more brutal than the stories often tell. We are going to explore the life of a pirate, not as a grand escapade, but as a harsh, precarious existence, one that few in our comfortable present could truly comprehend. Imagine, if you will, the gentle rocking of a ship, not across a calm sea, but upon the unpredictable, vast expanse of the open ocean, far from the safety of shore. Feel the subtle sway, the rise and fall, as we prepare to drift back in time, to a period when the lines between law and lawlessness were often blurred, and survival was a daily unspoken prayer. Our journey begins aboard a vessel that was, for many, both home and prison, the 17th century pirate ship. Imagine yourself, if you can, standing on the rough, splintered deck of a small, heavily armed vessel. The year is, let us say, 1690. The air is thick with the scent of salt, damp wood, and something less pleasant, a pervasive, almost metallic odour that speaks of cramped quarters and stale humanity. This is your new reality. The idealised image of the carefree pirate, treasure in hand, parrot on shoulder, quickly evaporates when confronted with the sheer, undeniable squalor of daily life aboard such a ship. Life on a 17th century pirate ship was not a grand adventure. It was a constant, grinding struggle against discomfort, disease, and the elements. Your living space would be a fraction of what you consider normal. A hammock slung in a shared, dimly lit space below decks, swaying with the rhythm of the waves. Personal privacy was an alien concept. Every waking and sleeping moment was spent in close proximity to dozens, perhaps hundreds, of other men, each with their own smells, their own habits, their own unwashed realities. The very structure of the ship, designed for efficiency in warfare and transport, offered no concessions to comfort. The timbers would creak ceaselessly, a low groan accompanying every roll and pitch. The only light would filter through small grates, or be provided by flickering oil lamps below, casting long dancing shadows that could play tricks on a tired mind. The air, perpetually heavy and often stagnant, would be a constant reminder of the confined existence. Even when topside, the sun, if it shone, offered little respite from the constant movement and the omnipresent scent of the sea. Let us consider the most fundamental of human needs: food. The romantic tales speak of feasts and rum. The reality was a monotonous, often unappetizing and nutritionally deficient diet. Your staple would be ship's biscuit, a hard, dry, unleavened bread, often infested with weevils. To soften it, you might dunk it in stale beer or water, hoping to mask the unpleasant taste and gritty texture. Salted meat, typically beef or pork, would be a welcome addition. But it too was hard, preserved by vast quantities of salt, making it incredibly tough and often difficult to chew. The salt content itself would contribute to a constant gnawing thirst. Vegetables were a luxury, a rarity, consumed only when a port offered fresh provisions, and they would quickly spoil. Imagine the longing for a crisp apple, a fresh green leaf, anything vibrant and alive. The lack of fresh produce meant scurvy, a debilitating and often fatal disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, was a constant companion. Imagine your gums bleeding, blackening, your teeth loosening until they fell out, your limbs aching with a profound bone-deep weariness, your skin developing purple blotches, your body growing weaker and more vulnerable with each passing day at sea. This was not an occasional affliction. It was an expected, terrifying reality for many, a slow, agonizing decline that could turn a strong man into a withered shell. Even if you survived a bout of scurvy, the recovery was long and painful, leaving you weaker and more susceptible to other ailments. Water, too, was a precious commodity. Stored in wooden casks, it quickly grew stagnant, developing a foul taste and often becoming a breeding ground for bacteria and algae. Imagine the lukewarm, slimy liquid, tasting of wood and decay, that was often your only source of hydration. Rum or beer were often preferred, not for revelry, but because their alcohol content made them safer to drink, less likely to transmit disease. Hydration was a perpetual challenge, and the taste of sweet, fresh water, clear and cool, would have been a forgotten luxury, a distant memory of a life on solid ground. The constant state of mild dehydration would contribute to fatigue, headaches, and a general malaise that permeated daily life. Hygiene, as we understand it today, was non-existent. There were no showers, no regular changes of clothes, no soap for personal cleansing. The same garments, perhaps a coarse linen shirt and canvas breeches, would be worn for weeks, even months, growing stiff with sweat, salt, and grime. Imagine the feeling of clinging fabric, abrasive against your skin, never truly dry. Lice and fleas were an unavoidable nuisance, crawling through hair and clothing, causing incessant itching, leaving small red welts. They were simply a part of the daily existence, a constant reminder of the lack of sanitation. The air below decks would be thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale food, human waste from inadequate latrines that were often little more than buckets, and the lingering dampness of the ocean, a pervasive, cloying odor that would cling to every fiber of your being. Imagine the claustrophobia, the stifling heat in tropical waters, the pervasive odors that would cling to every fiber of your being, seeping into your very pores. Even the wind on deck could not truly cleanse the air, merely redistribute the effluvia. The very act of breathing could feel heavy, as if you were inhaling the accumulated realities of countless unwashed days. Disease beyond scurvy was a constant, silent killer. Dysentery, typhus, malaria, and a host of other contagions would sweep through a ship with terrifying speed. Confined spaces, poor sanitation, and weakened immune systems due to malnutrition created a perfect breeding ground. A cough could quickly escalate into a fatal pneumonia. A small cut could fester into a life-threatening infection. There were no doctors, no modern medicines. The ship's surgeon, if one was present, would rely on rudimentary techniques, bleeding, amputation, herbal remedies, and the often unreliable power of prayer. Imagine a shipmate writhing in a fever, his skin hot and clammy, his cries echoing in the shared sleeping quarters. There would be no escape from the sounds and sights of suffering, a chilling reminder of your own vulnerability. The constant threat of illness would hang over every man, a shadow on the horizon, as real and terrifying as any storm or enemy ship. Discipline on a pirate ship, while often more democratic than on a Royal Navy vessel, was nonetheless brutal. While captains were elected and decisions often made by consensus, insubordination, theft, or serious breaches of the pirate code could lead to swift and severe punishment, often decided upon by the crew itself. Flogging was common, a public display of power designed to instill fear and maintain order. Imagine the sting of the lash ripping through flesh, the agonizing pain, the humiliation of being exposed before your peers. More extreme punishments, such as marooning, being left on a deserted island with a small amount of food and water, were a death sentence by slow starvation or exposure to the elements. This constant underlying threat, combined with the inherent dangers of the sea, would create an atmosphere of simmering tension, an unspoken awareness of the precariousness of one's own existence. The camaraderie, often celebrated in legend, was often tempered by a primal need for survival, a keen awareness of who might be a liability, or who might betray the unspoken trust of the crew. Life could be cut short, not just by an enemy, but by the very hand of your shipmates. And what of the daily routine? Far from constant adventure, life on a pirate ship was often defined by immense stretches of profound boredom, punctuated by moments of abject terror. Days would melt into weeks, spent scanning the horizon, performing mundane chores, mending sails, scrubbing decks, maintaining rigging, endless hours of lookout from the crow's nest, the repetitive tasks, the endless expanses of ocean, the lack of novelty. The monotony could be soul-crushing. There were no books, no newspapers, very little in the way of entertainment beyond card games, dice, and the occasional song shared amongst the crew. Storytelling, often exaggerated tales of past exploits or whispered rumours of future targets, would fill some of the void, but the human mind yearns for stimulation, for purpose beyond mere survival, and aboard a ship, it was often starved. Imagine the vast empty hours, the sun rising and setting with unchanging regularity, the only variation being the state of the sea or the fleeting glimpse of another vessel. The mind, left to its own devices in such an environment, could easily turn inward, fostering melancholy or resentment. Then, suddenly, the boredom would shatter with a shock that would reverberate through every nerve. A cry of, "Sail ho!" from the crow's nest would electrify the ship, snapping every man to attention. The sluggishness of routine would be replaced by a frenetic, desperate energy. The adrenaline would surge through your veins, transforming the ship from a floating prison into a lethal hunting machine. The scramble for positions, the loading of cannons, the drawing of cutlasses, the priming of pistols. Every movement would be infused with a grim determination. The deafening roar of cannon fire would tear through the air, vibrating through the very planks beneath your feet. The splintering of wood as cannonballs struck home, the screams of men, the acrid smell of gunpowder smoke filling the air, stinging your eyes and catching in your throat. This was the brutal, visceral reality of combat. And if you survived, you would then face the horrifying aftermath. The wounded, their bodies torn and bleeding, their groans filling the air, the dying, their life pouring out onto the blood-slicked deck. The grim task of repairing the ship under duress, patching holes, replacing shattered masts, and finally, the somber, anonymous burial of the dead at sea, their bodies consigned to the indifferent depths. The cycle of violence, while not constant, was always a possibility, a sudden descent into chaos that could end your life in an instant. Storms were another terrifying reality that could descend with little warning. Imagine the ship being tossed like a toy by mountainous waves, rising and falling with sickening lurches. The wind would howl like a banshee through the rigging, a terrifying shriek that seemed to mock human endeavour. The constant creaking and groaning of the wooden hull would intensify, every strained timber threatening to tear itself apart under the immense pressure. Men would cling desperately to ropes and railings, fear etched on their faces, as the ocean, vast and indifferent, asserted its absolute power. Water would pour over the decks, sweeping away anything not secured, threatening to wash men overboard into the churning abyss. Below decks, the darkness would be absolute, punctuated only by the terrifying crashes and groans, the certainty that at any moment the ship might founder and sink, dragging all aboard to a cold, watery grave. There was no escape, no refuge, only the desperate primal hope that the ship would hold together and that the fury of the tempest would eventually subside, leaving behind only the calm, mocking expanse of the sea. Beyond these immediate physical challenges, there was the constant psychological toll, the isolation from land, from family, from any semblance of normal society, the relentless repetition of the sea, day after day, week after week, with only the changing weather or the occasional distant sail to break the monotony. The fear of capture, which for a pirate meant not just imprisonment, but often a swift and public execution by hanging. The uncertainty of when, or if, you would next set foot on stable ground. This life demanded a particular kind of mental resilience, a stoicism born of necessity, or perhaps a profound detachment from the comforts and certainties of the world left behind. The camaraderie, often touted as a hallmark of pirate crews, was a fragile thing, born of shared hardship and necessity, and could quickly fracture under pressure or the lure of self-interest. So, reflect on this image for a moment. The perpetual damp, the pervasive stench, the ever-present threat of scurvy and debilitating disease, the brutal discipline that kept a fragile order, the crushing boredom that stretched for interminable periods, and the sudden, terrifying bursts of violence, or the overwhelming, indifferent force of nature. This was not the life of a romanticized rogue. It was a life of profound hardship, relentless desperation, and often a swift and anonymous end beneath the waves. To truly last a day on a 17th century pirate ship would require a resilience, a tolerance for discomfort, a physical fortitude, and a psychological robustness that few possess today. It was a life lived on the very edge of survival, where every sunrise was a small victory, and every sunset brought with it the fresh anxieties of the coming night. It was a testament to the sheer tenacity, and perhaps the sheer desperation, of those who dared to embrace it, or were forced into it, finding themselves adrift in a world of endless ocean and fleeting fortune. Their existence, far from being a carefree adventure, was a brutal dance with death, a constant reminder of the fragility of life when removed from the structured safety of civilization. As the gentle currents of our historical journey carry us onward, we leave behind the anonymous hardships of the common pirate's existence and turn our gaze towards a figure who, more than any other, embodied the dark, psychological undercurrents of the pirate era. We will explore the chilling reality of Edward Teach, better known to history as Blackbeard, a man whose legend was not built on the sheer volume of his plunder, but on the terrifying power of his cultivated image. His reign, though relatively brief, cast a long, fearful shadow across the Atlantic, demonstrating how a potent blend of theatricality and genuine ruthlessness could render a single man a force of nature, a living embodiment of the sea's most primal fears. Imagine the year 1717. The War of the Spanish Succession, which had seen many privateers and opportunistic sailors legally preying on enemy shipping, has ended. Thousands of men, trained in naval warfare and accustomed to life at sea, found themselves unemployed and often destitute. The harsh realities of the post-war world, with its scarcity of legitimate work and its unforgiving social structures, pushed many towards a life of piracy. Among these men was Edward Teach, a man of imposing stature, believed to have originated from Bristol, England, or perhaps the American colonies. His early life remains shrouded in the mists of history, a deliberate obscurity that only added to the mystique he would later meticulously craft. He likely served as a privateer during the war, honing his skills in seamanship, combat, and the art of intimidation. These were the fertile grounds from which the terrifying bloom of Blackbeard would emerge. His ascent to notoriety began under the tutelage of Benjamin Hornigold, a respected and successful pirate captain. Under Hornigold's command, Teach quickly distinguished himself, not merely through his fighting prowess, but through an innate understanding of human psychology, particularly the psychology of fear. He observed how the mere sight of a black flag, or the distant silhouette of a heavily armed brigantine, could induce a paralysis in their prey, often leading to surrender without a shot being fired. This was a crucial lesson, one that Teach would elevate to an art form. It was during this period that he acquired his most famous vessel, a captured French merchant ship that he meticulously refitted and armed with 40 cannons. This ship, a truly formidable sight, would become the infamous Queen Anne's Revenge. It was with the Queen Anne's Revenge that Blackbeard's legend truly began to take shape. He understood that true power lay not in brute force alone, but in the creation of an aura of invincibility and dread. Consider the psychological impact of such a sight. Picture yourself, a merchant captain, perhaps exhausted from weeks at sea, scanning the horizon. Suddenly, a colossal warship, cannons bristling, bears down on you. And on its deck, amidst the chaos and the shouts, stands a figure wreathed in smoke, his eyes glinting, multiple weapons glinting in the faint light. This was not a man. It was an apparition, a demonic force of nature, and the fear it instilled was often enough to break the will of even the most resolute sailors. Blackbeard understood that a ship that surrendered without a fight meant less damage to his own vessel, fewer casualties among his crew, and the preservation of the cargo. This was the ultimate efficiency in piracy, achieved through the mastery of psychological warfare. His reputation preceded him, sailing on the wind, a chilling whisper from port to port, stretching across the vastness of the sea. Blackbeard's tactics were not just about appearance, they were about calculated shows of force. He rarely committed gratuitous violence if surrender was immediate and complete. His goal was plunder, not senseless bloodshed, but he was always ready to demonstrate his capacity for extreme brutality if provoked. He would make it clear that resistance was futile and would be met with swift, merciless retribution. Stories of his ferocity, often exaggerated, would spread like wildfire through the maritime communities, further solidifying his terrifying reputation. It was a self-perpetuating cycle of fear. The more terrifying the stories, the more readily ships would surrender, and the easier his conquest became. His sphere of operations stretched across the lucrative shipping lanes of the West Indies and the American colonial coast. He raided merchant vessels, plundered towns, and established a stronghold in Ocracoke Inlet, North Carolina. His piratical actions were systematic and bold. He would lie in wait, sometimes pretending to be a legitimate trader, before suddenly raising his true colors and unleashing his formidable power. His crews were large, often numbering in the hundreds, and his fleet could swell to several ships working in concert, making him an unstoppable force for any lone merchant vessel. One of Blackbeard's most audacious acts of psychological manipulation, and one that demonstrated the zenith of his control and cunning, was the blockade of Charlestown, modern-day Charleston, South Carolina, in May 1718. Imagine the sheer audacity of this act. With 4 ships and over 400 pirates, Blackbeard effectively sealed off one of the busiest ports in the American colonies. For nearly a week, he held the entire town hostage, seizing 9 ships attempting to enter or leave the harbor. His demand was not for gold or jewels, but for a chest of medicines. He had discovered that his crew, suffering from syphilis and other ailments, were desperately in need of proper remedies. This was a testament to his practical nature, his concern for his crew's health, but it was also a brilliant stroke of psychological warfare. By demanding medicine, a relatively mundane item, rather than gold, he demonstrated his absolute power over the town's very existence, reinforcing the idea that he could take whatever he pleased, whenever he pleased, even the most basic necessities of life. The fact that the entire population of Charlestown capitulated to his demand, sending the requested medicines and releasing their captured hostages unharmed, cemented his legend as a pirate whose will could not be defied. The humiliation and fear of Charlestown were profound, a chilling victory for Blackbeard's calculated terror. But the life of a pirate, even one as successful and terrifying as Blackbeard, was inherently precarious. The very audacity that fueled his rise would ultimately lead to his downfall. The colonial authorities, particularly those in Virginia, grew increasingly exasperated and determined to put an end to his reign of terror. Their maritime trade was being crippled, their authority openly defied. Rewards were offered, and a concerted effort was launched to hunt him down. The man who would ultimately face Blackbeard was Lieutenant Robert Maynard, a young but resolute officer of the Royal Navy, commanding 2 sloops, the Ranger and the Pearl, detached from HMS Lyme. Maynard was dispatched by Governor Alexander Spotswood of Virginia with clear orders to bring Blackbeard to justice. The confrontation took place on November 22, 1718, in the calm, shallow waters of Ocracoke Inlet, North Carolina, a place Blackbeard considered his sanctuary, a natural fortress from which he could control the surrounding waterways. As Maynard's small sloops approached, they found Blackbeard's flagship, the Adventure, anchored, partially dismasted, and with many of his crew ashore. It was a momentary lapse in his usual vigilance, perhaps a consequence of his recent period of relative inactivity and the assumption of security within his chosen haven. Maynard's forces were smaller and less heavily armed than Blackbeard's ship, but they possessed the discipline and training of the Royal Navy. Blackbeard, ever the showman, responded to Maynard's approach with a typical blend of bravado and menace. He allegedly raised a black flag adorned with a skeletal figure holding a spear and an hourglass, a stark warning of impending doom. He then hailed Maynard, reportedly shouting, "Damnation seize my soul if I give you quarter or take any from you." To which Maynard, equally resolute, is said to have replied, "I expect no quarter from you, nor shall I give any." The battle that ensued was brutal and bloody, a microcosm of the grim realities of naval combat in the 17th century. Blackbeard's Adventure, with its formidable array of cannons, opened fire on Maynard's sloops. Maynard, understanding the superior firepower of the pirate vessel, adopted a cunning tactic. He ordered most of his men below decks, giving the appearance that his sloops were lightly manned, almost deserted. This deception was intended to lure Blackbeard's ship closer, making it vulnerable to a boarding action, where the disciplined Royal Navy sailors could bring their superior training to bear in close quarters combat. Blackbeard, likely observing the seemingly empty decks, saw an opportunity for an easy victory. He ran his ship aground in the shallow waters, a dangerous maneuver, but one that could allow him to trap Maynard's vessels. He then ordered his men to board Maynard's sloop, the Ranger. This was a fatal miscalculation. As the pirates swarmed onto the deck of the Ranger, Maynard's hidden men burst forth from below decks, unleashing a volley of musket fire and charging with cutlasses and pistols. The deck of the Ranger transformed into a scene of chaotic, desperate hand-to-hand combat. The air would have been thick with the clang of steel, the roar of pistols, the shouts of men, and the desperate cries of the wounded. Blackbeard, true to his terrifying image, fought with a savage fury. Accounts speak of him engaging multiple adversaries simultaneously, his immense physical presence and his array of weapons making him a formidable opponent. He received numerous wounds, musket balls tearing through his flesh, sword cuts crisscrossing his body. Yet he continued to fight, seemingly impervious to pain, a testament to his sheer will and formidable constitution. It was during this desperate melee that Lieutenant Maynard and Blackbeard finally confronted each other. The clash between these two figures, one the embodiment of lawful authority, the other of terrifying rebellion, was the climax of the brutal encounter. Maynard, despite being smaller in stature, fought with the precision and discipline of a trained naval officer. The fight was intense, a brutal struggle for supremacy. Maynard fired his pistol at Blackbeard, but it misfired. Blackbeard lunged with his cutlass, but Maynard managed to fend off the blow, delivering a counterstrike. Finally, one of Maynard's men, a Scottish sailor, saw his lieutenant in mortal peril. With a sudden, desperate swing of his sword, he managed to deliver a deep gash to Blackbeard's neck. This decisive blow, combined with the multiple other wounds Blackbeard had sustained, finally brought the pirate down. He collapsed on the deck, his legendary reign brought to an abrupt and violent end. Accounts vary, but it is generally accepted that Blackbeard suffered at least 5 musket ball wounds and 20 sword cuts before he finally succumbed. The sheer number of wounds he endured before falling solidified his image as a man of almost supernatural resilience, adding another layer to his fearsome legacy. With Blackbeard fallen, the remaining pirates, demoralized and leaderless, quickly surrendered. The battle was a decisive victory for the Royal Navy, a testament to the fact that even the most formidable of pirates could not ultimately defy the organized power of the state. Blackbeard's severed head was reportedly suspended from the bowsprit of Maynard's sloop as a gruesome trophy, a stark warning to any who dared to follow his path, a grim spectacle meant to quell the burgeoning piracy epidemic and restore order to the seas. His body, stripped of its fearsome trappings, was thrown overboard, swallowed by the very waters he had so long dominated. The ruthless reign of Blackbeard, though short-lived, marked a pivotal moment in the history of piracy. He was not just a successful plunderer, he was a master of psychological warfare, a showman of terror whose image alone could bring entire towns to their knees. His story serves as a chilling reminder that the true power of a pirate often lay not just in the size of their cannons or the sharpness of their cutlasses, but in their ability to manipulate the deepest human fears. As our journey continues, we now shift our focus from the volatile surface of the 17th century seas and the dramatic lives that unfolded upon them to the silent, unchanging depths below. Imagine, if you will, the profound tranquility of the ocean floor, where the passage of time is measured in eons and the turbulent events of centuries past are preserved in a cool, dark stillness. Here, beneath the shimmering surface, lie not just forgotten shipwrecks, but time capsules, offering poignant glimpses into the very lives we have been contemplating. We delve now into the exciting yet meticulous world of underwater archaeology, where patient exploration and scientific rigor piece together the lost stories of pirate vessels and their crews, transforming myth into tangible history. The Caribbean Sea, with its intricate network of islands, its treacherous reefs, and its historical role as a crossroads of global trade routes, became a natural haven and hunting ground for pirates. It was a region of immense wealth, with gold, silver, spices, and exotic goods flowing from the New World back to Europe. This very abundance, however, also made it a graveyard for countless ships, both merchant and pirate, victims of sudden storms, uncharted shoals, or violent encounters. For centuries, these sunken vessels remained largely undisturbed, their secrets guarded by the ocean's vast embrace. The concept of actively searching for and recovering historical shipwrecks is a relatively modern endeavour. For most of history, a sunken ship was simply lost, its cargo irretrievable, its story confined to a few fleeting logbook entries or whispered tales. Early attempts at salvage were crude and often focused purely on treasure, with little regard for the historical context or the preservation of artifacts. It is only in recent decades, with the advent of advanced diving technology, sonar, and sophisticated archaeological methods, that the true potential of underwater sites has begun to be realized. Now, the emphasis is less on mere gold and more on the invaluable data these wrecks provide, allowing historians to reconstruct lives and events with unprecedented detail. Consider the meticulous process involved in unearthing a pirate wreck. It begins long before divers even enter the water. It often starts with painstaking historical research, poring over old Admiralty records, colonial manifests, newspaper accounts, and letters from the period. A tantalizing clue, perhaps a mention of a ship sinking in a specific location or a detailed description of its cargo, might spark an expedition. Modern technology then plays a crucial role. Side-scan sonar, a sophisticated acoustic device towed behind a survey vessel, can create detailed images of the seafloor, revealing anomalies that might indicate a submerged structure. Magnetometers, which detect variations in the Earth's magnetic field, can identify the presence of iron objects, such as cannons, anchors, or even nails from a wooden hull, buried beneath layers of sand and sediment. Once a potential site is identified, the next phase involves careful visual inspection. Remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, equipped with cameras, can explore the depths, providing the first tantalizing glimpse of what lies beneath. If the site proves promising, highly trained archaeological divers then enter the water. This is not simply about going for a swim. It is a highly specialized, rigorous undertaking. Divers must contend with currents, limited visibility, varying depths, and the delicate nature of centuries-old artifacts. Every movement must be precise, every breath controlled. The excavation itself is a slow, methodical dance with the past. Imagine divers working in what often feels like a lunar landscape, carefully fanning away layers of sand and silt with small hand tools, or using specialized dredges that gently suck up sediment without disturbing fragile objects. Each artifact, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, is meticulously documented in situ, that is, precisely where it is found on the seabed. This context is absolutely vital. The position of a cannonball next to a musketeer's skeleton, the arrangement of cooking pots in what was once a galley, the scattered remains of a surgeon's kit. These details paint a far richer picture than any individual object could on its own. They reveal the layout of the ship, the roles of its crew, the final moments of their lives. Once an artifact is carefully excavated, it is often brought to the surface, but this is merely the beginning of its journey. Many objects, especially those made of organic materials like wood or textiles, or even metals like iron, are incredibly fragile after centuries in salt water. They require immediate and specialized conservation. Imagine a piece of waterlogged wood, perfectly preserved underwater, but which would crumble to dust if exposed to air and light without proper treatment. Conservation laboratories employ complex processes like freeze-drying, desalination baths, and chemical treatments to stabilize these objects, preventing their decay and ensuring they can be studied and displayed for future generations. It is a painstaking, expensive, and often lengthy process, a testament to the dedication required to truly preserve these fragments of history. One of the most iconic and thoroughly studied pirate wrecks, and one that resonates deeply with the very story we explored, is that of the Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard's flagship. Its discovery off the coast of Beaufort, North Carolina in 1996 was a momentous event, instantly capturing the imagination of both historians and the public. The site, designated as 31 CR 314 by archaeologists, has yielded an astonishing array of artifacts, offering an unparalleled window into the reality of a major pirate vessel. Imagine divers carefully sifting through the remains of a ship that was once feared across the Atlantic. What they have found is far more revealing than any romanticized image. Over 30 cannons have been recovered, some of them of impressive size, confirming the formidable firepower Blackbeard commanded. Think of the sheer weight, the logistical challenge of moving and operating these colossal weapons on a wooden ship. They are a tangible link to the thunderous roar of naval battles, the acrid smell of gunpowder smoke. Among the smaller artifacts, the personal belongings offer the most intimate connection to the crew. Imagine finding pewter plates and spoons, the very utensils from which these men ate their monotonous, often weevil-ridden meals. Think of the glass fragments from rum bottles, remnants of the preferred safer beverage of the era. Imagine the lead shot, musket balls and pistol parts, the tools of their violent trade, each one a silent echo of a desperate struggle or a swift act of aggression. Even more poignant are the medical instruments discovered on the Queen Anne's Revenge site. Surgical tools, including a large brass syringe, a bone needle, and a brass weight that may have been used to balance scales for apothecary remedies, have been recovered. These aren't just objects. They are direct evidence of the harsh realities of onboard medicine in the 17th century. Remember our discussion of scurvy and disease. These instruments speak to the constant struggle against illness, the desperate attempts by the ship's surgeon to treat horrific injuries sustained in battle, or the inevitable ravages of disease. They paint a stark picture of suffering, a visceral reminder of the human cost of life at sea. The syringe, for instance, might have been used to administer purges or enemas, common, if often ineffective, treatments of the time. The very presence of these tools underscores the inherent dangers and the lack of advanced medical care that defined existence aboard such a vessel. Beyond the Queen Anne's Revenge, numerous other pirate and merchant wrecks have been explored across the Caribbean and beyond. Each site adds another piece to the complex puzzle of maritime history. For example, the discovery of a specific type of cannon from a certain foundry might help pinpoint the nationality or origin of a vessel. The presence of specific ceramics can indicate trade routes or the provisioning patterns of a ship. Even the smallest fragments of wood or rope, when properly analysed, can reveal details about shipbuilding techniques, the types of trees used, and the level of craftsmanship. Consider the meticulous analysis of seemingly insignificant objects. A single ceramic shard, when properly identified, can tell archaeologists about the origin of the pottery, suggesting trade connections or the dietary habits of the crew. A stray shoe buckle might indicate the fashion of the time, or perhaps even a personal item belonging to a specific individual. Coins, if found, can provide precise dating for the wreck event. Each item, no matter how humble, contributes to the overall narrative. The process of underwater archaeology is also a race against time and the elements. The ocean, while preserving many objects, can also be destructive. Strong currents can scatter sites, marine organisms can consume organic materials, and shifting sands can bury or expose fragile remains. Moreover, illegal salvagers, driven by the lure of quick profit, pose a constant threat, often destroying invaluable archaeological context in their destructive pursuit of treasure. This makes the work of legitimate archaeologists even more critical, as they strive to protect and study these finite, non-renewable historical resources. The study of these wrecks provides more than just lists of recovered artifacts. It allows us to understand the social structures aboard these ships. For instance, the layout of the living quarters, if discernible, can tell us about the hierarchy among the crew. The study of these wrecks provides more than just lists of recovered artifacts. It allows us to understand the social structures aboard these ships. For instance, the layout of the living quarters, if discernible, can tell us about the hierarchy among the crew. The types of personal possessions can give us insight into their backgrounds, their aspirations, and the few comforts they brought with them into their harsh maritime lives. Did they carry religious texts, simple tools, small sentimental tokens from loved ones left behind? These details, though subtle, offer a powerful human connection across the centuries. Furthermore, analysing the remains of ships themselves provides invaluable information about 17th century naval architecture and construction. How were these vessels built to withstand the rigours of the open ocean and the violence of battle? What materials were used? How did ship design evolve to meet the demands of piracy or counter-piracy? The answers lie embedded within the timbers, in the patterns of their construction, and in the very scars they bear from past encounters. The unearthing of pirate wrecks also helps to demystify the pirate myth. While the romance of treasure and adventure persists, the tangible evidence from these sunken ships presents a far more grounded reality. It reveals men who are often desperate, resourceful, and brutal, living lives defined by hardship, danger, and a constant search for fleeting gain. The artifacts found, from the mundane to the extraordinary, paint a collective portrait of individuals trying to survive and thrive in an unforgiving world. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of an archaeologist, after years of painstaking work, finally holding a perfectly preserved compass from a sunken pirate ship. This humble instrument, once guiding a vessel through storms and unknown waters, now guides our understanding of a forgotten past. It is a tangible link, a silent witness to a life lived centuries ago. These sunken treasures, then, are not just hoards of gold and silver, though some significant monetary finds have certainly been made. Their true value lies in the stories they tell, the questions they answer, and the human connections they forge across the vast chasm of time. They are silent archives, patiently waiting for the patient, dedicated hands of archaeologists to reveal their secrets, allowing us to step, however briefly, into the real, often grim, daily lives of those who sailed, fought, and ultimately were lost beneath the waves of the 17th century Caribbean. The ocean, which once took these ships, now holds them in a timeless embrace, preserving their legacies for our quiet contemplation. As our quiet journey through the echoes of the 17th century draws towards its conclusion, we shift our perspective once more. We have explored the brutal realities of pirate life and the silent stories held within sunken wrecks. Now, let us turn our attention to the formidable forces arrayed against the pirates, the very instruments of state power designed to hunt them down and maintain order on the vast, often lawless oceans. Imagine yourself stepping aboard a majestic, yet profoundly demanding vessel. A 17th century British man-of-war. This was not a merchant ship, nor a rogue pirate brigantine, but a floating fortress, a testament to naval engineering and the disciplined, hierarchical might of the emerging British Empire. Life aboard a man-of-war was a stark contrast to the rough and ready, albeit brutal democracy of a pirate ship. Here, discipline was rigid, hierarchy absolute, and the living conditions, while perhaps marginally better in some respects than a pirate vessel, were still incredibly harsh, demanding, and often unforgiving. These were the ships of kings and queens, built for power projection, for war, and for the suppression of any who dared to challenge the established order. Consider the sheer scale of these vessels. A first-rate man-of-war, the largest class of warship, could carry over 100 cannons and accommodate a crew of 800 to 1,000 men. Imagine this vast number of individuals confined within the wooden shell of a ship for months, even years, on end. The sheer logistics of feeding, watering, and managing such a population at sea were monumental. These ships were meticulously designed instruments of war, their every timber and rope serving a precise function. The deck space, while seemingly expansive, was packed with rigging, guns, and various equipment, leaving little room for personal comfort or free movement. The hierarchy aboard a man-of-war was absolute and unyielding, a reflection of the social order on land. At the apex was the captain, often a seasoned officer, sometimes from the gentry, whose word was law. Beneath him were the commissioned officers, lieutenants, masters, and naval surgeons, each with their specific duties and responsibilities. Below them came the warrant officers, the boatswain, gunner, carpenter, purser, skilled professionals responsible for the day-to-day running and maintenance of the ship. And at the bottom of this rigid pyramid were the vast majority, the common sailors or lower deck men. Their lives were dictated by strict routines, constant labour, and unquestioning obedience. Unlike pirate crews who might elect their captains, a man-of-war crew had no say in their leadership. Authority flowed from the crown downwards, reinforced by a strict code of conduct and dire consequences for disobedience. Imagine being at the bottom of this structure, your entire day pre-programmed, every task assigned, every movement observed. There was little room for individual expression or deviation from the prescribed order. The daily routine aboard a man-of-war was a relentless cycle of duty, drilling, and maintenance. Long before dawn, the boatswain's whistle would pierce the air, rousing the crew from their hammocks. The day would begin with the washing down of decks, a constant battle against grime and damp. Then would come gunnery drills, polishing brass, mending sails, inspecting rigging, and endless exercises in ship handling. Every man had a station, a role to play in the intricate dance of running a large warship. This constant activity, though grueling, was essential for maintaining the ship's readiness for battle and its overall seaworthiness. Imagine the endless repetition, the strain on your body, the constant awareness of hundreds of others performing similar tasks around you. Even meals, often consisting of the same salted meat, ship's biscuit, and watered beer, as on pirate vessels, were eaten under strict supervision, a brief pause in the relentless cycle of work. Discipline was the bedrock of the Royal Navy's power, and it was enforced with an iron fist. While the pirate code often relied on collective agreement and peer pressure, naval discipline was absolute and brutal, designed to instill instant, unthinking obedience. Punishments were swift, public, and often horrifying. Flogging was the most common form of chastisement, meted out with a cat o' nine tails, a whip with 9 knotted cords, each capable of tearing flesh. Imagine the ritual: the crew assembled, the offender stripped to the waist, tied to a grating or mast, and the agonizing lashings delivered by the boatswain or his mate. Each stroke was counted aloud, the number of lashes varying depending on the severity of the offence. But even a few could leave a man scarred for life, both physically and psychologically. The pain, the public humiliation, and the sheer brutality of it were meant to serve as a stark warning to all. More severe offences such as mutiny, desertion, or cowardice in the face of the enemy could lead to a court-martial and frequently hanging. Imagine the solemn assembly on deck, the reading of the charges, the grim pronouncement of the sentence, and the terrifying spectacle of a shipmate being led to the yardarm. This was the ultimate deterrent, a clear message that the life of the individual was secondary to the order and efficiency of the ship and the service. The fear of the lash, and ultimately the noose, hung over every sailor, a constant reminder of the consequences of stepping out of line. Even minor infractions, like a dirty hammock or being late for duty, could result in reduced rations, extra duties, or confinement. Beyond the formal punishments, the sheer physical toll of life aboard a man-of-war was immense. The living conditions were incredibly cramped. Sailors slept in hammocks slung between decks, each man having a minuscule amount of space. Fresh air was scarce, especially below decks, and the pervasive smells of unwashed bodies, stale food, bilge water, and animal waste were constant. Rats and other vermin were endemic, scurrying through the ship, contaminating food and spreading disease. Disease was in fact the greatest killer aboard these vessels, far more deadly than any battle. Scurvy, dysentery, typhus, yellow fever and smallpox would sweep through the packed decks with terrifying speed. A single infected sailor could decimate an entire crew. Imagine hundreds of men, confined in close quarters, with no understanding of germ theory, consuming stagnant water and nutrient-poor food. The ship's surgeon, as we touched upon earlier, possessed only rudimentary tools and knowledge. Amputations were performed without anesthesia, infections were rampant, and fevers were treated with bleeding or purges. The sick bay, if one existed, would be a grim place, filled with the groans of the ailing, the stench of sickness, and the grim reality of impending death. Burial at sea was a daily occurrence on long voyages, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Disease was, in fact, the greatest killer aboard these vessels, far more deadly than any battle. Scurvy, dysentery, typhus, yellow fever, and smallpox would sweep through the packed decks with terrifying speed. A single infected sailor could decimate an entire crew. Imagine hundreds of men confined in close quarters, with no understanding of germ theory, consuming stagnant water and nutrient-poor food. The ship's surgeon, as we touched upon earlier, possessed only rudimentary tools and knowledge. Amputations were performed without anesthesia, infections were rampant, and fevers were treated with bleeding or purges. The sick bay, if one existed, would be a grim place, filled with the groans of the ailing, the stench of sickness, and the grim reality of impending death. Burial at sea was a daily occurrence on long voyages, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. The psychological toll was also significant. The monotony of long voyages, punctuated by moments of intense terror during storms or battle, could wear down even the strongest minds. Boredom was a profound enemy, combated only by the camaraderie of shipmates, the telling of stories, or the occasional game of cards. Yet, even this camaraderie was often tempered by the rigid hierarchy and the constant pressure of naval discipline. The sense of being perpetually at sea, cut off from land and loved ones for years at a time, could lead to profound loneliness and despair. Despite these hardships, the Royal Navy was an incredibly effective fighting force, and it was its sheer discipline and overwhelming might that ultimately curbed the Golden Age of Piracy. When a man-of-war encountered a pirate ship, the outcome was often grim for the pirates. The firepower of a well-armed man-of-war, with its multiple decks of cannons, dwarfed that of most pirate vessels. Imagine a broadside from a first-rate ship, dozens of heavy cannonballs tearing through wood and flesh, reducing an enemy ship to splinters in minutes. The training of the Royal Navy crews was also superior. While pirates fought fiercely, their training was often informal and opportunistic. Naval crews, by contrast, drilled constantly in gunnery, boarding tactics, and ship handling. They moved as a single coordinated unit, executing complex maneuvers with precision. This discipline allowed them to reload cannons faster, aim more accurately, and fight with greater cohesion in close quarters combat. Consider the contrast during a battle. On a pirate ship, the initial surge of adrenaline might be followed by disorganization if their charismatic captain fell. On a man of war, every officer and petty officer was trained to step into the breach, maintaining command and control regardless of casualties. The chain of command remained unbroken, allowing the ship to continue fighting with unwavering purpose. This inherent structural resilience was a critical factor in their consistent victories over pirate adversaries. Moreover, the resources available to the Royal Navy were vastly superior. They had access to well-maintained dockyards, regular supplies, and a steady stream of recruits, albeit often through the brutal practice of impressment. This meant they could repair damaged ships, replace lost cannons, and replenish their crews far more easily than a pirate crew operating on the fringes of society. The very existence of a powerful, organized navy was a deterrent in itself, a constant reminder to pirates that their days were ultimately numbered. The psychological warfare, which Blackbeard mastered, was also wielded by the Royal Navy, though through different means. The sight of a fleet of men of war sailing in formation, their countless cannons visible, their ensigns snapping in the wind, sent a clear message of overwhelming force and absolute authority. This was a statement of power that no pirate fleet, however audacious, could hope to match in the long run. The very presence of these ships represented the arm of the law, reaching across the vast oceans to restore order and protect legitimate trade. The Royal Navy, therefore, was not merely a collection of ships and sailors. It was a sophisticated, if brutal, system designed to exert control over the maritime world. It was a world of rigid routines, harsh discipline, constant vigilance, and ever-present danger. While a pirate might live and die by the sword, a naval sailor lived by the whistle, the cannon, and the unwavering command of his superiors. Their lives were dedicated to the service, to the crown, and to the relentless pursuit of those who threatened the established order. As we gently drift back from this glimpse into the rigorous life aboard a 17th century man of war, reflect on the sheer endurance of these individuals. Both pirate and naval sailor faced immense hardships, disease, and the constant threat of a violent end. Yet their paths, though intersecting in conflict, were fundamentally different. One embraced a fleeting, anarchic freedom, while the other lived under the strictures of immense organizational power. Both, in their own ways, shaped the history of the seas, leaving behind a legacy of challenge and survival that continues to fascinate and humble us.